Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Jones. Welcome to interCHANGE. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're going to talk about the two big statewide political races, the race for governor and the race for United States Senator. We're also going to talk about the obviously troubled Calumet County sexting district attorney. Okay, joining us today, our newspaper columnist, Joel McNally. Kevin Fischer is an aide to Republican State Senator Mary Lazarus and oftentimes a host over on WISN Radio. Denise Callaway, she's the communications director for the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. And Gerard Randall, consultant and local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, I hope you can stick around because right after this show tonight is a debate between the two guys running for governor, Scott Walker and Tom Barrett. I guarantee you it will be interesting. So the first thing we'll talk about is that race. The polls I've seen put Scott Walker pretty far ahead. At this point in time, do we believe the polls or is it way too early, Joel, to make any predictions?
No, I don't believe the polls because I don't want to believe the polls, but I really feel like the race has just started. There was a race for the Republican nomination, so Walker and Newman were out there a lot earlier. But usually, people are just tuning in to politics now. It's coming up fast. I mean, it's only 5 or 6 weeks, but it's going to be extremely intense. We know we're going to get hit with lots of advertising, but from all parties. I'm looking forward to the debates, but I really think the debates are kind of for us, people like us who follow politics all the time, and I don't know that they'll have a big influence on the outcome. Although I do think if they do, I think Mayor Barrett will do very well. I saw Mayor Barrett before a hostile crowd talking about the school takeover when he made a public appearance and had to argue before a group of people that weren't all that in favor of what he wanted to do, and I thought he presented very well. I didn't agree with him, but I thought he presented very well. He was a lot more forceful and dynamic than I think a lot of people give him credit for being. I think he'll be very well prepared, and it'll be interesting because both of those guys, Walker and Barrett, have very pleasant personalities. That's been the one thing, they're complete opposite ends of the spectrum politically, but they're appealing candidates. I think Newman was a much less appealing kind of candidate, and that would have been a different kind of a race and a nastier race. I don't think Walker can get by with running away from his record at Milwaukee County. And I think that could be his downfall ultimately. He does not have control of that budget. He goes around the state saying talks about creating surpluses and cutting taxes. And anyone that knows anything about Milwaukee County knows it is a mess. It is a shambles. And there are all kinds of scandals about the mental health treatment and buildings falling down. And I don't think he's going to be able to run away from that. And I think that ultimately could, how both candidates present what they've done in their respective offices could make a big difference.
Kevin, do most of the Republicans in Madison think, oh, Walker's got this in the bag?
Yes, they do. Of course they do. That was a
little cocky, huh?
What they're not walking around saying, oh, my God, we're in trouble. And I do believe these polls for a couple of reasons. Number one, the biggest is that most people have made up their minds on both sides. There are very few undecideds. The Barrett people have been Barrett people from the very beginning. The Walker people have been Walker people, and now he's going to pick up the Newman people. You have very few undecideds, and where I think the tide looks very good for Scott Walker is that in these polls, among the independents, Scott Walker has an incredibly huge margin, and that doesn't bode well for Tom Barrett. There are stark contrasts between these two, and I think having had a very liberal governor for the past 8 years, who has in the last year or two his popularity has gone down, 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 down. We have incredible deficits and skyrocketing debt. Politics often works like a pendulum, and the pendulum has swung. And I think you're seeing it in these polls. They're not razor thin. They are big margins for both Scott Walker and Ron Johnson, who we will talk about in the next segment. And I think these polls are pretty much on the money.
Denise, do you think we have a weird view of this race because we hear about these guys every single day, whereas if it was the Dane County executive running against the Dane County mayor, half the people, or the Madison mayor, half the people in Milwaukee wouldn't care about the race?
Yeah, I do think we're certainly influenced by this, and they're in this major media market. That while they're still certainly doing a lot of work in the rest of the state, they're also spending a lot of time here because they both still do have day jobs that they have to take care of.
Which can be distracting.
Well, it can be. It can be. But that's going to be the case with anybody who's running. There can always be distractions. I do think that we have a little bit of a skewed view of it, but I also think that, and I would agree with Kevin, these polls that we're seeing, the spread is really a big spread. And I think the concern that the Barrett campaign, I'm sure, is feeling is what independents are looking like when it comes to decisions that they're making about which candidate they support. There still is, 5 weeks can be a long time in a race, but you have to ask yourself, if you're sitting in Barrett camp right now, what can we do to, in essence, influence some of those independents to swing our way? And I think they've got a really tough road ahead of them. I think it's a very difficult road. The debates...
I think it'd be difficult for any mayor of Milwaukee.
Well, I think one of the things that we've talked a little bit about here is the fact that Barrett did not have a primary, and where that helped him in terms of not having to spend money, and it helped him in terms of not having mud thrown at him by another Democrat.
But it kept him off the campaign trail.
And it kept him, it did give Scott Walker an advantage in that way. I personally think that the debates are really interesting. I'll be watching the debates. I don't think most people are going to watch the debates. The only way the debates are going to make a difference is if someone does something stellar, or, pardon the other expression, if somebody does something stupid.
Right.
Those are the only two reasons that the debates are going to be able to make any kind of difference and swing voters or swing this election.
And I don't think people are going to decide how they're going to vote based on a Friday night debate. And I please stay tuned and watch, everybody.
Of course, we want everybody to watch.
If they're not watching, they're at a fish fry and they're not talking about this, and they've made up their mind already.
Now, are the polls going to change next week when Barack Obama's in Madison, him and Barrett are there holding hands, and the young people are all going to be pumped up? The next day or two, there'll be a poll, and won't it show, it's not that big of a gap anymore?
No, I don't think that'll be the case. I think this election is going to hinge on three things. One is anger, the other is apathy, and the third is turnout. There's a lot of anger among voters this year across the board, across the nation. Wisconsin is no exemption from that. People are angry about a number of things, taxes being among them, the state of the economy. All those things will have a role to play, and as has been pointed out, certainly by Kevin, that you've got people who essentially have made up their minds about the two candidates for governor. The second is apathy. And Joel alluded to this, the mayor speaking to the African-American community about the takeover of the schools. There's an apathy among young people. There's an apathy in the African-American community. That has to be boosted. That's where the president, I would have presumed, would have been helpful. He didn't come in and bring FEMA money, although FEMA money is coming later, but a good chunk of his constituency, both North Shore and Central City, were affected by those floods. And if nothing else, from a timing standpoint, I would have made sure that whatever federal support was available to help them would have come in at a time to help somebody in your party. It didn't happen. And so that was a wasted opportunity to go to Madison and to juice up student turnout in the Madison community. Well, I think it would be helpful if, for example, his congressional candidate had an opponent. That won't be the case. Many of the statewide races for Democrats and Republicans in the Assembly have pretty much been determined. Here, you don't have a whole lot of contest for local state assemblymen. You do have contest in the Senate. So that may bring out some voters, but it won't necessarily bring out the kind of turnout that's needed, especially in the African-American community. And then last, turnout. I think Scott Walker's turnout machine is just phenomenal. They made over a weekend 100,000 calls, personal calls, not robocalls. And I think this is the kind of thing that you're going to see happen again over the next several weeks that will give him the edge.
They are energized. I can tell you, they are energized just like the Democrats were 2 years ago. The GOP has really gotten its act together.
I agree.
All right, let's talk about
the GOP.
Well, it's true.
Let's talk about that other big race, the U.S. Senate race between Russ Feingold and Ron Johnson. All the polls show Feingold is down. Why is that? After 20 years, do people just all of a sudden, okay, we don't like Feingold anymore, or is Johnson such a strong candidate?
I keep looking at that ad that says 18 years, and it always amazes me that senators elected for 6-year terms. That in and of itself is an extraordinary time frame. But 18 years, it certainly gives Russ Feingold one big advantage, and that's name recognition. And for the most part, people don't associate it with high negatives. They may, if anything, say, well, did he bring home the bacon? Well, this is a year where a lot of folks are not in favor of earmarks. What has he promoted and been successful at that people in this state can be proud of? And you're kind of at your wit's end to explain that. What Ron Johnson has as an advantage, obviously, is a lot of money to define himself. And he's done that so far through the primary process. Will it hold up in the general election? I think that it will. I think that he'll be able to spend enough to counteract any negative ads that will be thrown out against him. And over the next 2 weeks, that will be key. Over the next 2 weeks, will he be able to withstand the onslaught of negative ads that will be out there? The one test for him, which he doesn't have the advantage that Scott Walker has, is a strong enough ground crew. For example, it hasn't been tested to the degree that you would think a real primary would have tested his ground organization. And the opponents that he had in the primary weren't the kind of opponents that really would have tested that.
Denise, now those debates, I think, have the potential to change things because Feingold is extremely smart, extremely experienced, very well-spoken. Nobody knows how Johnson is going to do against Feingold in those debates.
No, and I think the thing that we kind of remember about Russ Feingold, certainly when he was first elected, he was clearly the underdog in that case. And, you know, again, when he ran against Mark Newman, this is a guy you cannot count out. He's very astute politically. He is very smart. He's very comfortable in those debate settings. And that's not something that you can say for every candidate. I mean, it really is a skill to be comfortable in those debate settings. And I think that there's going to be more of a tendency to watch those because I think there's a clear contrast between a candidate people feel like they know or know something about and Russ Feingold and a candidate that people don't know as much about in Johnson. So I think those debates really are ones that perhaps can make a difference. But I think what we're seeing, and Gerard alluded to this in the last discussion that we had, there's a lot of voter anger out there. And in other parts of the country, we have seen that that has hit both Republican and Democratic candidates in the primary elections. Here in Wisconsin, you know, we really didn't have that issue in the primaries. We're going to see it in the general election. People are mad, and people who are mad tend to be more motivated to vote than people who may think everything's okay.
Now, the flip side of that debate coin, though, is that if people don't expect a lot from Johnson and he does come out and shine, a lot of people are going to go, wow, we didn't expect that.
Yeah, I think he may have peaked already, to tell you the truth. I mean, I was talking to a political reporter, very smart political reporter. How could, you know, Russ Feingold, having won, you know, in the past and having support not only from Democrats but Republicans, how could this guy who nobody knows be doing so well against him in the polls? And the response was that was an advantage, that nobody knew who he was. In this atmosphere we're talking about, where people are against incumbents, against what's going on in Washington, somebody nobody knows, you know, has an advantage. And this guy had millions of dollars to spend on TV to make himself look good. But at the same time, that only goes so far. And I think when people do start finding out who he is, that this is basically a millionaire that came out of nowhere and said, I'm willing to buy this election. I'll spend as much as possible to buy it. And not only that, but he's done some, you know, they talk about politicians, career politicians. That's who Johnson and the Tea Party people all complain about, taking, you know, saying anything to get elected. Ron Johnson already has taken, you know, opposite sides on several issues. Like, you know, he was in favor of gun registration and license until, you know, Feingold called him on it, and then suddenly he's against registering guns and licensing guns. He was in favor of drilling anywhere for oil because he owns BP stock, and including, he was asked, even if it's found in Lake Michigan. And when Feingold called him on that, he suddenly was against drilling for oil in Lake Michigan. So this is a guy who answers, questions two different ways, what John Kerry used to be accused of doing. And I think the more that gets across to people, and they start finding out who this guy really is, I think they know who Russ Feingold is, and they know that he doesn't give wishy-washy answers. He doesn't say something popular just to be elected, because he will take unpopular stands. He'll take a stand when he's the only one standing up in Congress doing it. So I think that's what has worked for him in the past, and I have to think that it's going to again. If you look at those national polls about anger, they say, yes, people are really upset with Democrats this year. The only people they like less than Democrats, the only thing they like less than Democrats are Republicans. They have a higher negative opinion against Republicans than Democrats, and I think this is going to come out.
Johnson's commercials are pretty darn good, though.
They're good. They're coming across as that he's not some, rich millionaire fat cat. That he understands what's going on. That he understands what's going on in Washington. He wants to change, and I'm sorry, the polls, every single poll has shown this mega incumbent. He can't even get to 50%, and in the book of politics, that's danger. I mean, you're talking a political death here. And Ron Johnson, again, like Scott Walker, has a big lead among independents, and that is huge. So I think we've heard the word anger thrown around quite a bit here tonight. The pollsters are saying the reason Ron Johnson, a relative unknown until a couple of months ago, has this big lead over the incumbent, Russ Feingold, is that it's not anger, there's an enthusiasm gap. There's a difference between the feelings and sentiments of the two parties. The GOP supporters are more energized and more enthusiastic and more aggressive and more into it at the moment than Democrats, who even admit that there are going to be big changes and big losses in November.
All right, we have to spend a few minutes talking about the sexting district attorney up in Calumet County. He's in treatment somewhere. The governor is trying to remove him from office, and the State Office of Lawyer Regulation, which at first gave him a pass, now says it will reinvestigate the case. I'm always amazed at how incredibly difficult it is in this state to really discipline anybody in the legal or medical profession. It's like they really protect their own.
I don't know what kind of treatment there is for being a jerk. or for using your position, to try to get sexual favors from women. I don't know what that treatment program is.
But shouldn't there be one? You're always talking about the need for treatment.
I think we saw in the Clockwork Orange or something. You sit the guy in front of a screen and
I don't know.
But you're right. What treatment do you give a guy who thinks that the greatest pickup line is, "Hey, you want to go with me to an autopsy?"
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But
exactly.
aren't there obviously some mental health issues there? When you read this stuff, you're like, okay, something's wrong with the guy.
I think something's wrong. I don't know if it's an issue of a mental health issue, or if this gentleman has just that much of an overinflated ego about himself. But I mean, the thing that I think we have to be very careful about doing is not spend all our time talking about this guy who has clearly has problems.
Talk about the regulations.
But the regulation issue. This is just abhorrent.
Yeah, an average citizen sits back, and it's not rocket science. It says to him or herself, wait a minute, isn't this an obvious case of not only being stupid and rude and inappropriate, but isn't this misconduct in office?
Using your DA's position.
Right. And you have this state board, which again makes people really hate government. The state board sits there and says, well, we don't really see any evidence of misconduct in office. My goodness gracious, it's clear as milk.
How many times do you read about doctors who have bad case after bad case after bad case, and nothing happens to them?
Well, that's one of the arguments that's generally been raised about accountability, and particularly the accountability of appointed boards and who gets named to those appointed boards and who's supposed to ensure that whatever decisions they render have some kind of oversight to make sure that they make sense.
That's why this stinks even more, because you have lawyers watching over lawyers.
Right.
But it's not just boards. The Attorney General knew about this, J.B. Van Hollen, a year before we knew about it, and passed on doing anything. This is
Passed it on to the Accountability Board,
Right.
which was supposed
which
to
didn't do anything. But
is that his fault?
There are laws in this state against sexual harassment,
Right.
Right.
and you know it could be also looked into by the Attorney General's office, and it wasn't. And where are all these people that are supposed to be protecting the citizens of the state?
You know, I heard a lawyer on the radio the other day that had something to do with one of the organizations or one of the boards that oversees the Office of Lawyer Regulation, and he said, these are good people. I would never question any decision that they make.
Wow.
Anymore.
I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I think that part of this is, if we just take a look at the title of this particular body, it's the Office of, Professional Responsibility. So the focus is on this individual as a legal professional. It's not on whether or not they want to take action against someone who does something that's incorrect. I think that's part of the problem with this. I think there's a great reluctance on the part of attorneys and physicians to take this kind of severe sanction
Against their own.
I do think that's the case.
There's another
But
problem.
he's an embarrassment
think
to
it's
their
a
own.
problem.
He's an embarrassment to other district
He is,
attorneys,
but,
to other lawyers.
everybody was rolling the dice that this was not something that was going to be made public. That was the roll of the dice that they took. I think we have to have some common sense on some of these boards. I'm not suggesting that attorneys and doctors don't have common sense, but I think we need to be able to balance that with the people who are served by physicians and attorneys
I have
and get their feedback.
one other question. I haven't seen the makeup of the Office of Lawyer Regulation, but I wonder, was it all male? Are there female representatives on that board?
I don't know who's on it. I just know they're
Somebody
lawyers.
asked me the other day, they said, okay, but did he hurt anybody, Dan?
Well,
Did he
that's
hurt
the
anybody?
problem. That's the
Is that
okay. That is the
really
problem, and everything we've said here tonight is true, and none of us are condoning what he did. All right, but the problem is that there may not be clear statutes about what he did that you can go after him and nail him on, and that will change in the next legislative session. There will be at least 1, 2, 3 bills about this particular case. But again, I'm not making light of this. I'm not condoning it. But what are you going to say? What are you going to say that he did that was guilty? What's law are you going to say that he broke?
Plenty you can say that was unprofessional.
Being a jerk. You said being a jerk.
Exactly.
Unprofessional.
Being unprofessional, being inappropriate,
Using the power of the district attorney for
I'm not
personal
making fun of this,
gain.
No.
but you can't is hitting on a woman, asking her out on a date. That's it's not against the law.
But and in that straight context, that's the case. But this just wasn't a woman. This was a woman who was a victim of domestic violence.
Very vulnerable.
Very vulnerable.
No debate.
Who he
And
was
another
supposed to
woman was
be
seeking a pardon and needed his support to get it.
My
and
point
he's using that
is that the
power.
problem here is that there's nothing clearly laid out in the statutes, and that needs to be fixed, and fixed right away when we go back to session.
Do we really need to try to legislate common sense?
Unfortunately, unfortunately, this case proves that because he didn't have the decency to resign or do the right thing, and nobody seems to know how to get rid of him, there needs to be stronger, stricter,
Governor's
clear
figured
statutes.
This is coming under review for a second time by the Office of Professional Responsibility and coming under review for a second time. What new evidence do they have that he was a jerk any more than what they had the first time? And will that then yield a
Additional
different result?
complaints, I think.
Well, more people have to come forward. They are. But, you're innocent till proven guilty. We've said that on this program, too.
When it comes with the political season, candidates tell you all about their qualifications for office. We hear it election after election. This year feels different, though, at least to Rick Horowitz. The best qualification seems to be no qualifications at all. Rick.
What if the rest of life resembled politics? It might sound something like this. Good morning and welcome aboard United Flight 382 with service to Los Angeles. My name is Pete and I'll be ably assisted here on the flight deck today by Mitch, who's the first lieutenant or the co-captain or whatever they call it. Our estimated flying time to Los Angeles is about 4 hours and we'll be cruising at an altitude of 40,000 feet more or less. I think that's what I heard, maybe 45,000 feet. I'm really excited to be here today. You know, this is the first time I've ever tried to fly a plane, but I've got plenty of common sense values, so those big thunderstorms up ahead shouldn't be any kind of problem. Now, if you'll just sit back and... I don't think so. Or how about this one? You know, finding out you have clogged arteries can be scary, and heart bypass surgery sounds complicated, but it's something that thousands of people successfully undergo every year. The key is finding someone you have confidence in. Now, unlike some of the people you may be considering, I'm not one of those career cardiologists. In fact, I'm not a cardiologist at all. I'm a small business owner, just like you are. But I figure cutting fat out of your arteries isn't all that different from cutting fat out of a company payroll. So there's... Feeling confident yet? Try one more. Thank you, thank you. It's such an honor to have won the contract to build this beautiful bridge over this magnificent canyon. They say it's going to be an engineering marvel, which is why it's so exciting that you didn't hire an engineer to do it. I'm an outsider. I have no engineering experience whatsoever. I didn't even stay at a Holian Express last night. And I can't wait to try out some of this great-looking machinery, especially that big hammery thing over there. Nice, huh? You wouldn't stand for it in the rest of your life, right? But hey, it's only your government, war, peace, health, safety, budgets, banks, roads, schools. Anyone can do it. Really?
Thank you, Rick, and thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.